Welcome back, Philos Catholic listeners, Beyond Rome listeners. I am with my co-host, James O'Reilly, and we have a guest today that I'm so looking forward to talking to, Maggie Phillips. Welcome to Beyond Rome.
Thank you so much for having me, James and Simone. I'm really excited.
We're so excited that you're on the podcast. You've been one of our desired guests for a while now, since we started it back in April. But Maggie, you do work that I admire so much. I think it's so interesting, so niche, and so very much needed in the life of the church. So you write for a series for Tablet, which is a Jewish magazine called Religious Literacy in America. So you're the Catholic, maybe you're the token Catholic among Jews. I don't know, but tell us a little bit about yourself. But I really love everything that you've written that I've read.
Well, thanks so much. I might be the only Catholic now. I'm pretty sure. I usually just refer to myself as an in-house ally. And it's such a gift to be able to do that. My work at Tablet comes from a grant from the Finding Davis Foundations to increase religious literacy among our readership. So I write about all different faith traditions, basically everything but Judaism, although occasionally it does touch on Judaism. And I just have the most delightful colleagues, and they're so intellectually curious. And I'm just so lucky to be there and so blessed.
How did you get into this work? Because it's just so unique.
It is, yeah. Niche is the right word. During COVID, I was doing sort of what I refer to as like light mommy blogging. I'm a military spouse, and there are some outlets for military spouses that I was writing for. And just kind of on a whim, I saw a tweet about and I read Tablet. It was always an interesting publication to me. And I saw that they were having a journalism fellowship that you could do remotely from anywhere. And Ooh. I just went for it. And I kind of forgot that I even applied until I got a call for an interview. And I was like, okay, cool. And I was up front in my application. I said, you're probably wondering why someone with the College of the Holy Cross on their CV is applying to work at Tablet. But I just really liked some of the work that they were doing around religious liberty was something that they were very concerned about, and just intellectual inquiry. It was very, very interesting and very different from anything out there. And so I thought it would be an exciting way to try my hand at something new. And I got the job, and I was assigned as a mentee to the editor-in-chief, Lana Newhouse, who at the time was working on a grant for the Arthur Finding Davis Foundation. And one of the things we had discussed was a journalism position that later became my position. And I think the last thing I said on our final call, like closeout call, was, hey, if that ever happens, let me know, give me a shot. And she did, which is crazy because they'd never met me in person. I didn't meet Alana in person until this past February at the Tablet staff retreat. I mean, I could have been like a crazy person. They just
it's Providence, Maggie. It's Providence.
Oh my gosh, it definitely was. And I've been there ever since. My grant just got renewed. I found out earlier, I think late last week. So I'm there for another 2 years doing this work. And it's honestly been the privilege of a lifetime.
It's so delightful to me that you as a Catholic are working at Tablet in this series. And yeah, I'm in admiration of your work. And I know that James is as well. And I think that story is right. So neat. The first thing I read from you was an article you actually published with Word on Fire. And you say you're kind of an inside ally at Tablet, but I feel like even though before we met that you were an ally to me and James and our work here at Philos Catholic, which is also very niche, trying to reconnect Catholics to their Hebraic and Near Eastern Christian roots. That's pretty niche. And then also the, forming, as we did last year, the Coalition of Catholics Against Antisemitism, which was in the works well before 10/7 because of the rising rates of antisemitism in America and the West. So, before I knew before we met, I was just like, she's my friend, she's my ally, she's in this like very niche work together. And the article that I read that we'll link to this podcast episode is that Christians have an obligation and a way to stop anti-Semitism. So, James and I have some questions that we'd love to pick your brain about. but also if there are things that you feel that you want to share and like I mean, you already write, so you share it all the time, but to a particularly American Catholic audience that is interested in reconnecting with their Hebraic roots, just feel free to share it with us as well. And I was really, before we kind of get into that article, yesterday or today, I can't remember. Was it this morning, last night? Who even knows? Who can say? Bishop Barron was in Prague visiting cemeteries of the 80,000 Jews that were killed in Prague, and he's wearing a yarmulke or a kippah, and he's taking these pictures. And I shared it in our group chat this morning. His Bishop Barron is also someone that I feel like is an ally in this space because he's so switched on to the problem of anti-Semitism in America and the West. And James said something like, "Oh, I like fear to read the comments section," and
I did read the comment section.
Yeah, you did, but I hadn't. And so I would love to hear your thoughts about that as well, because this is like our work is oriented towards like keeping Catholics in the right state of mind, which is that anti-Semitism is a sin. It's absolutely a sin, but there's more. It's more, your article is saying that there's more than just, we can't be anti-Semitic. Okay. Supposedly obvious, but there's more we have an obligation to. So if you wanted to speak into that a little bit, I would love to hear your thoughts. I don't know if you caught that yet with Bishop Barron and the pictures.
I did just this morning, and I did a Zoom panel with Father Steve Grunau and Luke Moon of Philos for Tablet.
That's right.
And Father Steve said that is something that they've noticed when they post Jewish content on the Word on Fire online, that they see these horrible, horrible anti-Semitic comments. And I, sort of braced myself when I saw that post this morning, because my first thought, of course, was, oh, how nice, how meaningful. And then I look at the comments and I'm just like, where are these people coming from? Like, where did all of these 16th century Renaissance people get Instagram accounts? I mean, it was crazy. And it is a sin. And it's, to talk that way about anybody, first of all, I mean, is just crazy.
Yeah.
But on top of that you would go after Jews, and he's talking about the Holocaust. I mean, to me, that's a clear, bright red line of something that we can all agree is bad. And there was all these horrible anti-Semitic tropes and questions about why would you wear a kippah? I mean, it was so ignorant and so upsetting. And I know Prague a little bit. I'm an army brat. I grew up in Germany. I spent a lot of time in Germany growing up. And so that's one thing that's always been at the forefront for me, because in Germany at that time, in the 90s, you didn't talk about the war. You did not talk about the war. As Americans, we were very, very much aware that was not appropriate. And it was also very clear that they took their role in what happened in the 1930s and the 1940s very, very seriously. I think I was probably in college when I heard a Holocaust joke for the first time. And it was so upsetting to me, because the way I grew up, it was taken so much more seriously there than Americans were taking it. And I couldn't believe it. And I was very surprised by that. And so the fact that the Germans that I encountered growing up took it so very seriously, and the Americans I saw were sort of very nonchalant, was very surprising to me. And I think kind of in a way created the slippery slope to where we are now. And of course, I love free speech protections in America, and I think you should be able to say whatever you want. But on the other hand, the permission structure that we created around that topic, the fact that it wasn't really a social taboo in the same way it was, of course, in Germany, if I recall correctly, it's illegal, but still, there was no social taboo around it. It was very surprising to me. And so, to see someone go visit a site like that in Europe, having visited sites like that myself in Europe, it's something I don't take lightly. And it's something that I think more Americans, if they get a chance to do, should do. And to see that it was not received in the way that growing up I would have thought anybody would have received an American public figure visiting a Holocaust site, it
Right.
it was very disturbing to me.
It's disturbing. And do we, I know we talk about this a lot at Fearless Cat. I mean, do we address those? Because it seems crazy and obviously sinful. And I don't know where, I love what you said. Where's this medieval Renaissance vibe coming from? I don't know where it's coming from. Do we try to find out where it's coming from? Do we address it directly? Or do we just encourage devout Catholics to just keep in the right state of mind? Do we make folk like what is your, do we start to address those people more actively? I don't know. I really don't know. It's a question we talk about a lot at Philos.
I think it's a leadership thing. I think leadership sets the tone. So I'm 37 years old and I grew up in the 90s. And I think we kind of had this idea, and I'm going to kind of contradict what I said earlier about the Holocaust jokes. I didn't hear that many Holocaust jokes. Like, generally speaking, it was understood that anti-Semitism was bad. And I think we sort of thought Nostra Aetate has been written, the church has spoken on this. And so I sort of feel like the church leadership felt like, well, why would we address this? We've killed that dragon, onto other things.
Right.
And I think nature abhors a vacuum. And so it's the world's oldest hatred. Again, I have no idea why. Again, these people saying this, they were not Venetian doges. They weren't having their money changed by Shylock. I don't know where these stereotypes are coming from, but they're nature boards and vacuum, so they're going to fill. It's going to be filled, and so I think the church leadership has a real responsibility to kind of remind people, bring it up in your sermons, bring it up in your homilies. I mean, we pray for the Jews on Good Friday, but maybe we could address a little bit more the way we address all kinds of things. We address hatred in church. We address racial hatred in church. It's another form of racial hatred. I really think it's something that we could maybe bring up a little bit more, particularly because we are an Abrahamic faith, right?
Right. Like, it's not just, oh, the document's out, because there were documents that are in support of our Jewish brothers and sisters before Nostra Aetate, but of course Nostra Aetate was really groundbreaking and super helpful, especially on a pastoral level. But yeah, I think you're right about the leadership, but I do feel we need to turbocharge it a bit, because maybe we're not addressing exactly all the kind of strange, not sure where you got that argument from. But also, I think the thing that boggles my mind is that these people seem to be fans of Bishop Barron in other arenas. So if you trust Bishop Barron and Word on Fire with so many, with your formation in so many other arenas, why, when it comes to this one, is Bishop Barron in the wrong?
Yeah.
If you trust them with this, why not also that? So that's kind of a big question mark for me. That, and also, he's like one of the greatest, if not the greatest evangelizer, at least clerical evangelizer in America and probably the West. So do you really think your comments, because I read some comments about like, hopefully a Jew reading this is going to like convert before, is that like, that's not Bishop Barron's vibe at all with all the souls that he's like brought into the church. So why, what's going on there? I don't know. Because I don't think it's just like Bishop Barron haters that are putting comments on there. I think they're like some of his fans, but then like, oh my gosh, like you've betrayed us now when it comes to this one issue, which is, again, a big question mark. A lot of questions, Maggie.
Right. And I wish I was the person to answer them for you.
I know. I'm just.
If I might, I mean,
No, go ahead, James.
You have something like Nostra Aetate, but I think a lot of those Renaissance Catholics, not even Renaissance Catholics, but I know traditional Catholics who aren't like super tratty either. They're just well educated. They know history, but they've never even heard of something like Nostra Aetate too. And even just the history of Catholic-Jewish relations isn't something that's ever been on their radar. So even if there's precedents for, not being anti-Semitic in the church before, that's just not something that's ever even addressed. And And then in their minds, Catholic-Jewish relations is only this thing that was kind of created because of the Holocaust. And we have this kind of guilt, and it's like, well, why do we have to feel guilty about that? So I think a lot of it too is just a certain selection of history that we don't get as Catholics, even as traditional Catholics, and that's much to our loss, I think, in being able to understand and address a lot of these issues.
No, I think that's right. I think there is a lot of historical illiteracy there. Certainly, I was kind of surprised at what I didn't know when I started working at Tablet. Judaism is so rich. The history of Judaism is so rich. And you see things. I remember doing a scripture study with a women's scripture group about Teresa of Avila, and they were kind of downplaying the Inquisition. And I was like, I would be embarrassed to do this. Like, this is not an argument. This is not a winning argument. You know, like Teresa of Avila has so much to offer us as a deeply spiritual woman, as a saint, as a doctor of the church. Why are you going to spend so much time saying, well, you know, the Inquisition wasn't really that bad, and some of the people involved kind of liked it? I'm like, who is that for?
Who's it for?
You're addressing a generalist lay audience. I mean, a lot of these people probably were not paying attention in history class. They don't need to be sold like the version of the Inquisition you got doesn't tell the whole story. They didn't get into version of the Inquisition. Like, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Can we just focus on Teresa of Avila and the beautiful things she has to say about mental prayer and the spiritual life? Like, that for me, you know, Dainu, right? It's enough. So I think that there is some responsibility in the church to kind of not make assumptions that anybody knows what they know. And I think we see that a lot in church leadership with doctrinal stuff even. The bishops are up here. The Pope is up here. They have these documents that they issue. They have these statements of faith, these encyclicals. I don't know about you, but I could probably go ask everybody in my parish their thoughts on Laudato Si, and they, you know, Amoris Laetitia, and they'd be like, I'm sorry? I don't know hablo.
Yeah. I don't know what an encyclical is.
Yes,
and that,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think they make assumptions that everybody's thinking about things the same way that they are. And so you kind of have to get really basic with things and just not make assumptions about what people know. And I think that, again, we should probably do that with a host of issues. But anti-Semitism is definitely one of them. And I think one thing, too, is because there is this perception among Catholics, I think, of a certain age that, you know, the Holocaust, we've dealt with it. You know, we beat the bad guys. It's over. So they sort of feel like we can engage with Judaism the same way you might engage with, like, a Reformed Protestant and kind of spar intellectually with them. And I think that that's certainly something that in the right context you could pursue. But I think Catholics know so much less about Judaism than they know
absolutely.
Calvinism, that you're like, apologetics bro stuff, you know, oh, what about the Talmud? Oh my gosh, where do you even start with the Talmud? And that's one thing you saw a lot in the comments with Bishop Barron is like, well, do you know what they say in the Talmud? That, okay, like you can't engage with them the same way you're going to engage with like a guy who goes to a mega church, you know?
Well, and your comment about like it would be appropriate in a certain context. I think the in a certain context is like with your actual for in real life Jewish friend with equal education and formation levels. Yes, that is the right context to have those kind of real conversations. And Maggie, that's something I really appreciated about your article. Like, I just assumed that Catholics had, this is my own like naivete and just bubble. I just, because I grew up in Los Angeles where, you know, I had like in real life Jewish friends and just kind of thought everyone did, which is I'm kind of embarrassing to say out loud, which I've said before. But yeah, so for me, it's like when I read that in your article, that was the mistake I had made where I'm like, oh, that might not be a thing for a lot of Catholics, you know?
Right. And I've had people find out you work at Tablet as a Catholic, and certainly people in my life sort of treat me. And I think I said this in an article I wrote for Tablet about being an ally to the Jewish people, where I said people sometimes kind of treat you like the Lorax who speaks for the Jews, you know? And I'm like, don't don't ask me. Like, I don't know. I
Right.
mean, there's a saying that I hear a lot at Tablet and elsewhere, the two Jews, three opinions thing. And that's true
Hmm.
it's true for
Yes.
Christians, it's true for Catholics. And so to ask me, what do the Jews think about X? I'm like, well, how much time do you have? Do you mean Reform Jews? Do you mean conservative Jews? Which, by the way, doesn't
Right.
mean what you think it means. Like,
Right.
so yeah. And so they think like, well, I have my talking points. I have my biblical text. I have my church fathers I can quote. I'm going to go toe to toe with Jews online the way you can with Reform bros about religion. And it's like,
Yeah, I think you would never say those things unless you were or not in say them or say in that way if that person you're quote talking to was actually your Jewish friend, right? It would be a whole different vibe
Conversation.
conversation.
I was going to say, you speak like, again, it's about combating anti-Semitism, but there's also the positive side of it where it's developing this philo-Semitism, I think. Even in your piece, you write about this idea of, or not this idea, but the reality of having written for a Jewish publication. You've immersed yourself in Jewish culture, its beliefs, the text traditions, and you find yourself kind of awed and humbled. And it's not like it takes away from your own Catholic faith either. If anything, it's helped, develop and deepen this love you have for your own Christian faith. So how does that, I feel like that's an important aspect for people, because I feel like whenever I speak about, trying to engage with their Jewish roots, people kind of immediately go to like, oh, well, we have the fulfillment, we have Christianity, we have Catholicism. We don't really need to do with this Jewish stuff. Could you speak to that?
yeah.
I mean, how is that engagement with Judaism enriched your own Christian faith?
Oh my gosh, how hasn't it? I think I would start with the example of the Shema prayer, which is from Deuteronomy. And in Judaism, it's a prayer that traditionally is prayed first thing in the morning, at the end of the day. And you say it covering your eyes. And it's, hear, O Israel, the Lord God is one. And it goes on to talk about how you need to teach the faith to your children, whether you're coming or going at work. It's just God is everything, right? And that's a great way to begin your day and end your day. And it's part of the night prayer in the Liturgy of the Hours sometimes. Sometimes that's the scripture reading for night prayer. And that comes from Judaism, saying that right before you go to bed. That's from Judaism. And I wrote a piece I mentioned I'm a graduate of the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I wrote I think it was an Advent meditation for them one time, for a devotional that they do every year. And I talked about Judaism and sort of the way that it's changed the way I think about engage with faith, engage with God. And I heard from a rabbi who also attended the College of the Holy Cross years before I did. And he said that he always liked seeing the statue of Jesus in the middle of the quad. It's Jesus as king. He's got a crown on. And he said he liked seeing it because he said, well, there's at least one other Jew here. And
that's so sweet.
And
I love that.
me, this rabbi said, like me, he grew up saying the Shema prayer. And that's something that unites them. And I'm sorry, if that isn't beautiful to you, then I don't know what to tell you. Like,
I don't
I have a quick
know.
question.
Yeah.
Why do you? I've never heard of them or people covering their eyes during the Shema prayer. What's the symbolism behind covering your eyes?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think you would have to ask a rabbi because there are different. I've read different explanations, but I think it's such a beautiful way. I mean, what's something people do after receiving the Eucharist? They cover their faces, right? And there's just something about that just brings you in, and I can't explain it. But I mean, it's certainly something that made me more intentional about really covering my face after I received the Eucharist. And it just sort of makes it's just you in the dark at that point, and it really kind of sends the message to you, like, you are just you. It's in the end, it's just going to be you and God, right? And in that moment, it's just you and God, and you're kind of contemplating the enormity of him physically in the Eucharist, or the creator of the universe being one and making you, you of all people, he made you, you know. It's really something special to take the time to contemplate. And one thing that I did after October 7th is I reached out to our local synagogue to see about attending a Shabbat service just in solidarity with them, which is an idea I got from Philos. And
Aww.
yes, and we did. So a couple of families from my kids' school, my kids attend Catholic school, met there, and it was a family Shabbat. So the rabbi was explaining kind of as they went through what was happening, what everything meant, which was perfect for, you know, an outside audience. And you know, she talked about when they come around with the Torah, you can touch your siddur to it. And because it's a liturgical faith, it made sense to my kids. Like they just got it. And so they saw the Torah come out of the tabernacle and be paraded around, and they've been to a Eucharistic procession. Like they know what they're seeing. And so they took out my son, who normally never pays attention at Mass, starts panicking, looking for his siddur so he can touch it to the Torah when the Torah comes around. And they talked about the Shema prayer, to bring it back to why I brought this up. And they said, you know, when you pray the Shema prayer, traditionally we cover our eyes. And I look over and you have, I think, 2 or 3 Catholic school kids all covering their eyes, reciting the Shema. And it gave me chills. And it's just, that's something that unites us. There's nothing in the Shema prayer that isn't something Catholics believe. And again, the fact that they did it and it meant something, you know, clearly was meaningful to the kids. You know, there are some things that kind of transcend having a scholarly explanation for it. Although, again, if you look, there are exegeses on why that is. But it really is a meditative practice that I've incorporated that I find very meaningful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So well, it seems like you, in your piece, you addressed that kind of connecting with the deeply religious side of Catholicism and Judaism. But then you also go on to address sort of the opposite side of that, where seems like there's a lot of young people who are devoid of any sort of faith tradition. So they're more gullible, perhaps, than because of these kind of slogans that come by. And there's still this sense of justice that they have. But then things with October 7th happen, and the extremist pro-Hamas groups kind of jump on that and hijack that feeling of injustice and use it for whatever different ends they have in mind. Most of the time, you know, to get rid of Israel. But I guess how do Catholics help to offer an alternative to that to many of these people who might not have any sort of deep faith tradition that helps them kind of anchor and get through these kind of instances or these fads, to be clear, but also even to combat something as perennial as anti-Semitism?
I would say it makes me really sad that the phrase social justice is something that people use kind of derogatively now. If you want to talk about a young kid in a street protest and it's not your thing, you'll be like, oh, these woke social justice warriors. Well, who are the social justice people? The Catholic Church. Where do we get the phrase social justice from? Hello. That would be a wonderful and the way it's become political, and it should never have been political. Like, we're the social justice church, the preferential option for the poor. That's us. It would be wonderful if Catholics worked to reclaim that phrase and say, well, no, like, social justice is an unalloyed good, properly channeled. And it's not a conservative thing. It's not a liberal thing. It's the right thing to do. And because clearly these young people marching, I said earlier, nature abhors a vacuum. They want justice. War is horrifying. No soldier I know likes war. And they want it to stop.
Right.
They want it to stop. And they're pursuing justice as they understand it.
Right.
And,
Right.
you think about the 7 habits of highly effective people, and you've got your circle of concern and you've got your circle of influence. And what if
Right.
the church really leaned into itself as the social justice church? These children, these young people are, blessed are those.
Because they're called for social. I mean, obviously, they're called for radical social justice, but it has to be ordered to the truth, which is another unique contribution that we can make to the world that loves lies and social media arguments and the spirit of truth. Jesus promises the spirit of truth 5 times in the Last Supper discourse. So what if we match their desire for justice, which is a good, I love what you said about that, Maggie, with the desire for truth, and help form and order them in that way. I guess that leads me to a couple questions as we conclude. I think maybe they're not exactly the right questions for wrapping up the conversation, because they could all be its own conversation. But in this work of combating Catholic anti-Semitism, how do we decouple Israeli geopolitics from anti-Semitism? Is that even possible?
I think it's in the Word on Fire piece where I say it can feel like you need a PhD to even wade into
Yes.
this issue.
Right.
And I don't. I have a bachelor's in political science that I got 16 years ago. So I'm not certainly going to do that here today. But what I will say is anti-Semitism was a problem in the US before October 7th, before the war in Gaza.
Right.
And I was writing about it for Tablet before then. And it's been something that's concerned me for some time. And this it's not just vibes. You can look at the FBI hate crime statistics and see that it's real.
Right.
And it is real. You just have to look at the comments on anything that Baron posts about Judaism. So go back to the circle of concern, circle of influence thing. Jews are a minority in this country. So it's totally understandable if you don't have Jewish friends. Like, don't beat yourself up about it. Like,
yeah.
But, I said in my Tablet piece on allyship, you may not know any Jews. That's okay. The first step is admitting you have a problem. And, there's ways to show up as a Catholic, like, again, reaching out, contacting your priest, your Catholic school principal, and saying, hey, maybe we invite them to something, or maybe they invite us to something, and we can make this an organic way to get to know each other. And that's the thing, we stayed after the Shabbat service, we had dessert together, we had coffee. It was beautiful. My kids still talk about it,
Yeah.
And also too, Catholics are so concerned about religious liberty and, attacks on the faith. Well, I can go to mass pretty much any day I want, and there won't be a cop car in front of my church, and the door is not locked.
Right.
Well, you go to Shabbat at the Reform Synagogue here, there is. There's just certain things to be aware of and to realize and say, hey, gosh, if that were me, I would really want to know that I wasn't alone, right? And that's where being an army wife comes back to my experience. Like, I know what it's like to have terrorists trying to kill people that I love, in some cases succeeding. And that's the thing about October 7th is, a lot of Jews know people in Israel. So October 7th was very upsetting for them in that respect. I know what that's like, and I know what it's like to feel alone, because most people don't have people at war, just the way most people don't know Jews or have people in Israel that they care about. And it's very isolating.
Right.
It's very isolating to have people dying and being threatened, and to feel like no one cares. And so I think it's a leadership issue, just the way I think that the church leaders need to talk more about anti-Semitism. They need to talk more about social justice to provide a outlet for people, young people who are hungry and thirsting for righteousness. I think they also need to be those faith leaders who reach out to the rabbis in their neighborhood and say, hey, maybe you come for donuts after mass one day, or we'd love to join you at Shabbat or something, like make those connections. And it's so much more meaningful when it's a top down thing, I think. Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know if that answers.
I have a couple more questions. No, it does. But James, I wanted to give you a chance to get in there before I wrap it up with, I guess, 2 more really huge questions for Maggie. We're all over the place because Maggie, there's so much again, you're in this like niche space. So, I'm just trying to.
I know in a lot of ways, this is it's like, I don't know, 2 people, like, I don't know, close-up magic magicians or something who finally get a chance to talk to each other about, talk trade.
I mean, that's how I feel. Yeah. I mean, I'm not asking you questions for the podcast, although I am, but I'm asking you sincere questions as like a colleague in this space, in a very hard space, in a very hard time. I think my other couple questions had to do with, I go back and forth with like in this movement, this coalition of Catholics against anti-Semitism, which always, for all the negative comments that we get, sometimes are personal. The comments that we get from like Jews who become Catholics, or Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews, whatever kind of, and Catholics themselves who find us and go, oh my gosh, I'm so happy there's a coalition of Catholics against anti-Semitism. I've been wondering what is the church's response in a real way is to all of this. So that for all the bad comments, there's so many good ones where we're just like, all right, that keeps us going. But I kind of go back and forth, Maggie, with like, should we in this movement like call for Catholics to be a little bit braver with identifying as like Catholic Zionists? Because the word itself has so many different connotations and meanings. Is it going to alienate too much? Is it too much in the Protestant evangelical world that Catholics would never buy into it? Do we like what is the best strategy with that word? Because back when I used to work at Endow and was answering John Paul II's call for what he said. It's his words. It's John Paul II's words for a new feminism. I would never identify as a feminist, even if I'm a pro-woman, pro-Catholic, pro-life Catholic but I just wouldn't use the word, even though JP2 does. Do we advocate for like a new Catholic Zionism? Is that how this movement should go? What are your raw thoughts about that? And have you thought about it?
I have, actually. And I think, so again, I mentioned I'm 37 years old. I am a product of, I came of age politically, I guess, socially, culturally during the Bush years. And that's really the first time I remember hearing about Zionism. And I didn't really know what it meant.
Right.
And it was always a term that I associated with evangelical Christians. I didn't know.
Exactly. That's what we think. Yeah.
I was very young, and at that time, I played Hodel and Fiddler on the Roof, but I did not have many Jewish friends at that time.
Oh,
so
dream roll.
Oh my gosh! I mean, I'm still talking about it, right?
I'm jealous. Right, I would be too. Dreams.
Yeah.
Dreams. Yeah.
Anyway, no big deal. But anyway, my point is, I didn't know that there were Jewish Zionists. I thought it was just a word for Christians who read the Left Behind books and were kind of weird about Israel. Like, I didn't know anything else beyond that. And so, yeah, flash forward, I understand now that Zionism is a very old term that has all kinds of things associated with it. I think the word Zionism, though, it depends on who's using it and what they mean by it. And it's not always clear to a lay audience. I think one thing that advocates for the Jewish people, I think one thing that Christians have an obligation to do, who would call themselves Zionists, is to be very clear about what that means, to define very clearly what that means. And by that, I suppose I'm referring to the idea that we're not waiting for the end times. We're not conspiracy theorists.
Right. We're not dispensationalists. We're not, yeah. None of that. That's like not in our Catholic theology.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I think the Catholic theology is different from the evangelical theology. We're not fundamentalists. We understand biblical prophecy differently. So, it's tricky, and I don't know,
It's tricky if
yeah,
it's like helpful or not. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I don't know. We at Fearless Catholic, we define Zionism as like just pro-Jewish, pro-Israel, no dismantling of countries that have policies you don't like. Just like in America, we don't ask for America, who also have very complicated origins, as many countries do, to be dismantled.
Yeah.
So it's like a very mere Zionism kind of vibe. But again, we don't use that word officially. But I was just curious what if it would help or hurt the movement against, just anti-Semitism.
I think it would just confuse it, because that
Yeah.
term has
Yeah.
so many associations for what it means when Christians use it. And so
Right.
I think, we talked about this before the show, but I think the really bright line is calling for the dismantling of a country. That's where I say, okay, now your criticisms of the Israeli government, now your criticisms of the war have crossed over into something I don't recognize. What other country do we call for their dismantling of? I don't agree with Russia invading Ukraine. I don't think Russia shouldn't be a country. So
Yeah. Right.
so that to me is
Yeah.
always the
Great
bright
point.
line.
Yeah. Well, to throw another big item at you, Maggie, as we're closing, the Pope recently made the claims, or not the claims, but he recently announced that there should be an investigation to the genocide claims of Israel committing genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. What, as Catholics or even just non-Catholics, I know you've had Jewish friends who have probably asked you about it. How should people think about that?
Yeah, so there's two strands I would disentangle there. And the first would be that not everything the Pope says is an article of faith, right? By which I mean he's not speaking ex cathedra, so it's not something Catholics are bound by. And he's not saying, therefore, Catholics need to do X, Y, or Z. He is allowed to give his opinion. And I think that is one thing to make very clear. The second thing I would say is that the word Catholic means universal, and the Pope has to be for everybody. And so we've seen historically what happens when the papacy takes sides in conflicts, right? Like, it's not good. It's not something that is a policy we typically do. We being, the Vatican, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing I would think about. And then I would also bring it back to spiritually my prayer. And this is where my background as an Army wife and an Army daughter come into focus, which is that I hate war. I hate war. It's taken my dad from me for years at a time. And he missed a lot of important times in my life. It's taken my husband from me for many years at a time, months at a time. So no, I am not a pro-war person, generally speaking. So my prayer in any conflict is scriptural, and it's for there to be cries of victory in the tents of the just. And as Catholics, the just can be anywhere, right? And so my prayer is always, always, always for justice, for the just to prevail. And we know as Catholics and as people of faith that in the end, the good guys win. And my prayer is also always for the Holy Spirit to put to confusion enemies of truth, enemies of justice. This is also from the Psalms, to wreak havoc on the madness of oppressors. So I know that the just can be anywhere, because as I was telling you before, my dad took a brigade to Ramadi, Iraq during the height of the surge in 2006, 2007 in the Sunni Triangle, which was bad. It was really bad. Al-Qaeda was running everything, and they had Al-Qaeda Sunni tribesmen, sheikhs who had been working for Al-Qaeda up until that point, come to them and say, we don't want to work for the bad guys anymore. We want to work for you to help kick Al-Qaeda out. And they did. And so when I say that tents, cries of justice can
Amazing.
be anywhere, they can be anywhere. And so my prayer is just always for people of integrity who hunger and thirst for righteousness' sake to prevail. And in the end, they will, even if it's not in my time.
Amen.
So so that's where I'm coming
Thank you,
from
Maggie.
on that. And I one more thing that I'd like to bring up. This is one of my favorite scripture quotes that really kind of guides me in my work at Tablet. And I used it at the Tablet staff retreat that about kind of what my North Star, why I'm there, why I stay there. I would always stay there.
I was going to ask you that. So thanks for sharing about that. But I was like, restrain yourself, Simone. Oh, I can't wait to hear this.
Yeah. Not why I stay there, because that makes it sound like I'm looking for an out, but no, why I love being there. Why
God called you there, why, as you're part of your personal vocation, your growth, you're a gift to your life.
Oh yeah. And I pray a gift for other people too. But, it's Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23. And, in those days, 10 people from nations of every language will take hold of the cloak of every Jew and say, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. And I'm at Tablet. I'm with my colleagues there because I see the work that they're doing and the people that they are. And you can tell when God is with someone. And we know that God is with the Jewish people. And so I'm there because that's where God is. And as a Catholic, where he chose to make his home as a man for 33 years. So I'm going to be there just the same way I'm there when he shows up every Sunday in the Eucharist. If God's there, I pray that I'm worthy to be there.
Oh my gosh, Maggie, what a beautiful, beautiful testimony, and what a beautiful way to end this conversation. So grateful to you for who you are, all of your work, and for spending this last hour with us.
Thank you so much. This was it was great. It was heavy, but also great.
as this work is.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Maggie.
If this episode was helpful for you, please consider sharing it with a friend, leaving a rating and review to help us spread the word, and donating at philosproject.org/give with the comment Catholic to support this podcast. To learn more about becoming a Christian leader in the Near East, check out our Pathfinder free online courses, also on our website. Thanks for listening. See you next week.